Welcome everybody. My name is Shane Ohly from Career Events. I'll just do a little bit of background chatter as we admit people. It'll take about a minute or so to get everybody admitted into this webinar. Thanks for joining us tonight. Obviously you're less interested in the football, as certainly me and Eleanor, we're not particularly excited about the football this evening, and I think certainly I for one much prefer to be doing sport rather than watching sport. Before we get started, for those of you who have joined us already, there's myself here. I'm in the Career Events HQ in just outside Kendal. My colleague Eleanor, say hello, Eleanor.
Hiya.
Eleanor's here doing the kind of admin and looking after the Q&A. So in terms of chat and Q&A, if you want to kind of chat, use the chat button, and you can maybe say where you're from. I'll do that myself right now. Hello, Shane from, let's spell from right. Okay, so there we go. But if you've actually got a question that you would like myself or Filippo or Pip to answer, please can you use the Q&A function? And what we will do, we will get back to everybody in that Q&A. If we don't answer a question in real time, we'll come back to it at the end of the session. So we're just waiting to find Pip, and hopefully she'll be joining us very shortly. How are we doing?
Still not coming up in the lobby. I'm admitting everyone. Pip has still not appeared.
Just bear with us while we get going here. So how many people have we got? So there's 49 of us currently. People.
Pip's still struggling to join. Just trying to find her a new link.
Okay, so if we're just going to pause for a minute, we'll get Pip Haworth, who's one of our guests tonight, admitted, and then we'll get going. So what I will do, I'll carry on with those introductions. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm in Kendal in the Lake District. Filippo is joining us from Cape Town. So hopefully you can see Filippo on the webcam there. And once we get Pip into the chat, she's joining us from Penrith, which is 45 minutes up the road north from us in the Lake District. So hopefully we'll get started pretty soon.
Yep, she's just trying to find the link to join.
The joys of the internet. So again, let me just say the plan for tonight. So what we're going to do, we're going to chat with Pip and Filippo about their experiences. If you've got any burning questions about either the Montaigne Dragon's Back race or Cape Wrath Ultra, please ask them. We'll do our best to cover everything as we go. And obviously Filippo and Pip have got loads of first-hand experience to share with you tonight.
I've resent the link.
Okay, what I think we'll do, we'll get started. As soon as we get Pip, we'll kind of introduce Pip. But let's start with Filippo. So Filippo, you've joined us twice. You took part in the Dragon's Back race this year. And also you did the Cape Wrath Ultra back in 2018 on one of the editions when we had really, really fantastic weather. So maybe my first question to you is, what was the factor that made you decide to enter either one of those races?
For me, I've done a lot of single
No, we've
Their
lost
events called.
Filippo.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear
Yeah.
you now.
We've got you.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, I'll start again. In the trail running world, whether it's in South Africa or overseas, there's an abundance of single stage events, anything from shorter distances all the way up to 200-mile events. But true expedition style events, which I think is the way you describe your events, Shane, are not are a bit rare. Certainly, we don't have many in South Africa. So they're one of the ways to really traverse and see a wilderness area. And so for me, that was probably the attraction for both Cape Wrath and Dragon's Back, was to see a part of the world that is foreign to me. I don't live in the UK, and to do it in a supported way with an event organizer like yourself. So for me, that was the main attraction.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, brilliant. We can now welcome Pip. So as I mentioned earlier, Pip is from Penrith and just up the road from us. And Pip took part in the Cape Wrath Ultra in 2022. So this year it was famous for its bad weather. It rained every day, all day. It was a particularly challenging event for everybody, event staff and participants. And I think between Filippo and Pip, they're going to have different perspectives on the event, because when Filippo did Cape Wrath Ultra, he was 6th. And when Pip did it this year, she was the last finisher, which I always think is the hardest possible way to do one of these races, because you're literally out twice as long as anybody else. So, Pip, the question I just asked Filippo, and I'll now ask you, was maybe you can share why you decided to enter Cape Wrath. What was your reason for that?
So I think the first time I heard about Cape Wrath, my mum had sent me one of the videos from a previous event, and I watched the video, and I mean, who isn't enticed by a race by just watching their race videos? Just like the wilderness journey in Scotland. We used to live in Scotland. I used to live in Galloway, so I've always spent a lot of time there, and I really like being in remote places. I've done a lot of multi-day hiking in the UK, and it was just watching those was like, oh yeah, it really would be something I'd like to do. But I always thought it was for a few years time, me in the future, when I'd done a lot more running and stuff. And then I think entries came round, and I got the email, because I was on a mailing list, that entries were open the next day, and I was like, oh no, I'll leave it for another time. And my mum was just like, yeah, but you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen to you in a couple of years. So why not just do it now? So I was like, oh, go on then. We'll just do it now.
And so, Pip, you think that was a good decision?
Yes, yeah. Despite the weather, I think it was a good decision.
Okay, so I'll just stay with Pip, and I'll come back to Filippo with this question. But Pip, can you just tell us about your kind of running experience and background? At that point when you decided to enter, where were you as a runner?
I hadn't been running a huge amount of time. So I say that I kind of started running when I was 16. Bearing in mind I'm only in my mid-20s now. And it was on and off for a long time. And I didn't get into doing ultras until maybe about 3 years ago. So I hadn't done a huge amount. When I actually entered the race, I had 3 50-mile ultras that year to do, but I hadn't done them yet. So I wasn't even at a point where, I'd completed them and I was thinking, okay, it's time for the next big thing. I hadn't even finished them yet. So bearing that in mind, the furthest I'd ever ran was 45 miles on a previous ultra. So really didn't have a huge background in running, hadn't run for years and years, but I'd done a lot of hiking. I was working towards my mountain leader. I think I'd done my mountain leader training at that point. and I've done lots of you know, multi-day walking and cycling and camping in bad weather, good weather, all that sort of thing. So for me, it was more, yeah, the expedition side of it appealed. Yeah.
Okay. And I think maybe possibly in contrast to that, I get the impression from the conversations I've had with Filippo previously that you've got a lot of experience. Do you want to talk about where you were at the point of entry?
Yes. From my first event with Ohly, my first expedition race was in 2018, which was, and I DNF'd, and then came back in 2022 and successfully completed it. This year is actually my 30th continuous year of running ultra marathons. In the early days, I was more of a road runner. Anyone who's done a bit of ultra distance road running will probably have heard of the Comrades Marathon, which is very popular in South Africa. So that was an event that took up most of my 20s and 30s. And then in my 40s, trail running started to emerge about 15, 20 years ago. So yes, so I certainly came into any one of these events, both Cape Wrath and Dragon's Back, with certainly a wealth of experience. So my motivation was not so much distance-wise, but more the attraction of a different type of event and a different country. I think those were certainly the two big factors for me, was the travel aspect and a different format.
Okay, I think I can certainly identify with that, and on a personal level, when I'm traveling to race and visit events, you know, going to another country is always a big attraction for me, and discovering some new trails in a new area, kind of particularly mainland Europe, where most of my running adventures have been recently. So let's stay with Filippo, and I guess the next question was, what was the thing that you kind of most concerned you before you arrived at the event, the thing that kind of preoccupied your mind most when you were preparing?
So for me, it would be the unknown. And so the known was very much the athletic side of the event. I was comfortable with the distance, my ability to handle the distance. So the unknowns was the terrain, the weather, and the logistics. And so that was, you know, how do I do things? Where do I go? How do I get to the start? So that things like that. South Africa is a hot, dry country. The United Kingdom is a cold and wet country. So literally complete opposites, both in terms of hemisphere and in terms of climate and in terms of terrain. The underfoot conditions tend to be muddy, wet, and boggy. In South Africa, they dry, rocky, and hard. So those were things that I was quite nervous about, especially because I couldn't go out and practice on the course or practice on similar terrain. So I relied heavily on reading blogs, reading the race website. Literally every single word on the race website I read, to try and extract as much information as I could about how to manage the logistics, how to deal with the weather. Ohly Events makes lots of videos talking about things like how to cross a river in spate, how to sort out your feet, and I watched them, you know, religiously, and extracted as much as I could out of it, in order to make up for the fact that I couldn't put the level of preparation in that a local runner would. And in that sense, it became a far bigger and far more consuming exercise for me, which I thoroughly loved. I think the preparation one puts in, and the planning one puts in for travel, you know, is almost as exciting as the event itself.
Absolutely. I always, when I'm talking to participants, but particularly potential participants, I always say that the real value in these big events is in the process. And I would be the first to recognise that the Dragon's Back of Cape Wrath is not a cheap event, and I would definitely hope people think it's good value for money, but the process of preparing and training, it's actually can fulfill a whole year's worth of motivation. And I think that's something that's quite special in the taking part, the participation.
I will interject there.
Oh, sorry, go for it.
I will interject and say one has to be careful, because the day after I got back from Dragon's Back, my partner said, "No more Dragon's Back. I don't want to hear it." That's all I've heard about for 12 months.
Well, I think that is exactly what I mean. Case in point. So Pip, can you tell us about the things that were occupying your mind before you took part in Cape Wrath this year?
I think mostly it was distance and terrain, like not doing any sort of distance like it before was definitely daunting, and that was one of the main reasons I wasn't going to enter. And then terrain. So I spent time in Scotland, used to live in Galloway. I know how bad it can get, and the thought of 8 days of that was like, right, you need to do something about that. And luckily I live right next to the Lake District now, so I spent a lot of time just finding the worst parts of the Lake District and going and getting stuck in bogs and things. I live at the foot of the Pennines as well, so that's a great training ground for that sort of thing. I think it pushed me into training and into getting it sorted and getting it done. I think without that pressure there, you kind of you need to have a bit of fear for it. Otherwise it's what's going to push you into training and things like that. So distance and terrain were definitely the two big ones for me.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a pretty common apprehension for most runners when they come to these events. So while we're thinking about training, I'll jump back to Filippo and just say I kind of think you've almost touched on this already, but your top tips for international participants in terms of how they can prepare for coming to the UK. What did you learn from that experience?
So for me, I was fortunate enough when I completed the Dragon's Back this year that I'd already come to the UK twice before to run the Cape Wrath and a previously unsuccessful Dragon's Back. So I could draw on those two events. So I'm going to go back to my very first Cape Wrath in 2018 and answer it from that perspective, because for my very first Cape Wrath, I didn't have any running experience in the UK prior to that. And for me, the level of detail on the website was fantastic. In a sense, it also gave me confidence that the event was going to be a well-organized event. It's amazing how the detail and the organization on a website often translates into the practice and the way the event organizers deliver an event. There's a level of detail, there's a level of logic and understanding. Everything you need is essentially there. And so that was my first reference. The second is reading blogs. It's incredible how much useful information comes out of historic blogs. I read people's blogs, and then I found out, on day 3, we run through a village and we can pick up spare supplies at the co-op on day 3. And so all of a sudden that went into my planning and my coordination. I didn't need to have so much food in my oven, in my camp bag, because I could pick up some supplies there. So it helped me with my planning. But it also helped me in terms of understanding the conditions. People were talking about where they struggled with navigation, where they got lost, where the underfoot conditions were. I learned before my first Dragon's Back that the really tough days are days 1 and 2. you've got the steeper terrain, the more technical rocky terrain, but then it transitions to a different type of terrain in the middle of Wales. It tends to become more boggy and wet. So that helped me decide, do I need different shoes for different types of terrain? How much road surface am I going to be doing? And all of this came out not just from the website, but it came out from a lot of blogs. Another good source is, I think a lot of athletes are on Strava. So I followed a lot of the runners from previous years, and I looked at their Strava maps. I saw the routes that they took. I compared it to the official route, and I said, why are they going that way when the official route is over here? Is there something that myself as a foreign runner who cannot get on the route, is there something I should learn from that? So there's a level of detail one can get to if you're prepared to put the time in. The data and the information is out there. There's so much one can get. And the more these races are now fairly well established. So there are many previous events, and so the amount of information that is available to the public through Strava segments, through blogs, is growing each year, to the point that one can almost get a bit overwhelmed with the amount of information out there, because people love writing about their experiences. It's kind of very cathartic, after a big event, to kind of let the emotion out. I did it myself after all my big expedition events at Cape Wrath and Dragon's Back, even the one that I didn't finish. So for me, that would be, as a foreign athlete, would be my main go-to sources of information.
Well, thank you. That was a really good, very comprehensive reply. And the one thing I take away from that as an organizer is I just wish everybody would read the information on the website, because the number of emails we get on a customer service capacity of asking questions, which are very clearly described on the website, it's quite remarkable, actually. Pip, let's kind of same question to you, really, about your preparation. But one of the things that I know you did is you went on the expedition race weekend. So maybe you could start from that point and go from there.
Yeah, I'm taking my own tips off of this webinar as well. I really got a lot from the expedition training weekend. It was really, really good. I got given it as a Christmas present, so it's quite nice. It was really good meeting a lot of people that were booked onto either the Dragon's Back or the Cape Wrath. So got a lot of support from them after that weekend as well. And there was a really, really good mix of speakers. So from people who've won both events to like Nathan, who'd come last in the Dragon's Back the year before, and everyone in between, nutritionists, a lady that was talking about like strength and conditioning and all sorts. And it was really good, mostly because I found out that I was doing a lot of things right, and it was quite comforting to know. But then took away some solid things, like definitely focus a lot more on strength training as I'm moving on from there. And yeah, it was a really, really great weekend, and I'm really glad I did it, actually. Other than that, on with training. So I was also training for a 100-mile race later on in the year. So, having no experience of anything like this before, the distance or anything, or even multi-day things to that extent, I just started with a 100-mile training plan from somewhere that I'd worked from before, so I knew that sort of training plan would work for me. And then trying everything out, so taking out all my kit every single day, even if you're on short silly runs, it feels stupid to run with a big bag, but you do it anyway. Eating all the time, using my poles, and yeah, just getting out doing that sort of stuff. And I did read through a lot of articles on the website, and they were very helpful.
Well, that's good to hear. So I can see in the list of attendees on the webinar that Kate Worthington from Raw Adventure is in the audience, as is Ian Stewart from Trail Running Scotland. And Ian from Trail Running Scotland runs some recce trips for Cape Wrath Ultra, and Kate runs all of the Dragon's Back recce trips in Wales. Kate's business, Raw Adventure, also organising the kind of expedition race weekend next March. I think it's 4th, 5th, something like that, but first weekend of March. So I'm going to be going to that to speak and to be on hand to answer questions. It really is a really great way of preparing for the event. It's not just the information you glean from it, it is kind of meeting other people and building that kind of community that will help you get through the event. So Pip, I'm going to stay with you for this next question, because you did talk about running with your pack and taking your kit out with you. So you've clearly made some decisions about kit early on. Can you perhaps share with everybody some of those, what you felt were the most important kind of elements of your kit preparation?
So I didn't have to pick up a lot of kit already, despite not having done a lot of ultras and things. I already had a lot of kit. So like I said, getting out and about with it as often as you can, and you'll hear about it. Everyone will tell you that, practice with your kit, practice with your kit. But it's so key, because if you're out in terrible weather and you're getting wet under your waterproof, it's not going to last for 8 days. And that was one thing I learned. So I went out and got a new waterproof, and getting used to it. Even I was getting used to where to put things, where to put food that's easily accessible. And it's absolutely key, because you don't want to get to the race and be finding all those things out on day one. That'd be awful. So yeah, I was using it all the time for absolutely everything. And by the time I got to race day, I knew exactly what I needed, where it was going to be, things that needed to be different for different days and all that sort of stuff. So yeah.
Okay, and maybe, thank you for that, Pip. Filippo, maybe you could comment on your kind of kit preparation strategy as well.
So kit for me, in terms of specific items, wasn't a big issue, because I've been running for so many years. I've built up often from bitter experience. I've learned what works and what doesn't, and how much kit I need. And I think it's quite a specific thing. It was interesting. On Cape Wrath this year, we had some reasonably poor weather on the first couple of days. And I can't remember the Englishman who won on days 1, 2, and 3. Shane, you'll know his name. He ran.
Now you're testing me.
He ran bare-chested. He ran in a pair of tights and his pack on, nothing else other than his shoes, obviously, and a pair of socks. And it was cold, bitter weather, but he was running at a level of energy output which he didn't need to put any layers on, whereas other people obviously run a little bit slower, and we've got different levels of metabolism. So for me, the kit choice wasn't a big issue. For me, it was more an issue of choosing the right gear to put in my camp bag, because the camp bag is quite limited in terms of size, in other words, volume, and in terms of mass. So I spent a lot more time choosing the gear that I wanted in my camp bag. Did I want a fresh pair of clothes every day versus running in clothes from the previous day that I'd either washed or had time to wash? So for me, that was the greater challenge and the more interesting one, because it involved a much broader range of gear and equipment that I needed with me. And I think that's just a reflection of the fact that I've been running for so many years, that I know that's my favorite rain jacket. That works in wet weather. Those are the base layers I use, etc., etc. If I'm in very cold weather, I need that down jacket. That fits in order of layering as I go from progressively good weather to progressively worse weather. And I think the issue that we get wrong as runners is not necessarily carrying the kit, but when to put the kit on, and at what point in time do we need to layer the kit. And I think that we often get ourselves into a cold situation because the kit's in our pack when it should be on our body.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And at the Cape Wrath Ultra this year, we saw a number of very cold participants, including one quite serious hospitalization. And in all the cases, these runners were carrying kit that they could have worn to keep themselves warmer. And I think we've had a few questions in the chat about more details on kit. Whilst tonight's, we don't have the time tonight because there's only 5 hours of the evening left to talk about kit in detail, because we can go on forever. What I would say is have a look at the kit list that's on the website, and bear in mind that's the minimum, like the minimum kit list that you need to be safe on the hills. And as Filippo mentioned, Chris Cope, who was running bare-chested at Dragon's Back, it's different for everybody. That's pretty unusual. And I suspect I've not spoken to Chris about this, but Chris actually had some really bad chaffing on the latter days of the event. And I suspect that was aggravated by the fact that he wasn't wearing a t-shirt on the early days. And you certainly need to be thinking that this is a 6 or an 8 day event, and your clothing strategy, kit strategy, needs to be in a kind of a long-term mindset. The one thing that I've picked up from chatting to participants over the years about the equipment that they put in their camp bag is that they generally say things like, I could have worn a smelly t-shirt for a second day, but I wish I had a pillow with me. And it's making themselves comfortable when they're sleeping, comfortable and warm when they're sleeping in the camp is really important. Pip, did I ask you that question? Sorry, I lost my own thread here. I think I have, haven't I?
The kit question, yeah, you did. I just
Okay.
want to add on that it's so true that everybody's different, because I was seeing the front runners run past me halfway through the day, and they're just wearing thin waterproofs and a t-shirt and barely, that's it. But for me and everyone that was around me, we were layered up to the eyeballs, multiple jackets, multiple t-shirts, long leggings, waterproof, the whole lot, because we're moving that bit slower. So yeah, it is definitely worth putting a lot of thought into layering systems, especially if you think you're going to be out there for longer.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that. I've got a little correction to make as well, which I said right at the beginning that we'll go for about an hour. It's actually about 90 minutes that we were scheduled for. So I just suddenly realised that an hour we're gonna run out of time really quickly. So we'll wrap up on 90 minutes, not 1 hour. So we've got quite a lot more time actually to work through this. So the next question that I want to ask, and I'll go back to Filippo, and like specifically for you, were there any kind of obstacles, challenges that you kind of had to face as you were building up and getting ready for the event?
The obvious one was COVID, because I was due to run in 2021, and I couldn't travel. So I think the 2021 Dragon's Back was essentially a British Isles only event. There were very few foreigners. I don't think there were even any Europeans there. I stand corrected on that. So, but other than that, and I put it down to preparation and planning. I started my training early. I gave myself plenty of time to get fit. And in doing so, I ensured I didn't get any major injuries on the way. My kit list and my planning for that again was done early, so I had all the gear. I was practicing with it, I was training with it, and even then, I was still leading up to the event. I was still making decisions. There were quite a few either-or decisions. Do I go with this? Do I go with that? But the fact that I was looking into these options early enough on gave me plenty of time to make the decision. So I didn't find myself rushed in the last 6 weeks trying to either fit in last-minute training. So, to be honest, I think the reason for my successful Cape Wrath and Dragon's Back was the fact that there were no major obstacles on the way, and put that down to, yes, a bit of good fortune, but the fact that I didn't leave things to the last minute.
Great. I think good preparation always pays dividends. I think that's a pretty sound approach to life. Pip, so same question to you. Did you have any specific challenges, obstacles in the build-up?
So mostly just training alongside like work and home life is well, training in itself is a big commitment, and doing it alongside everything you've got to do. It's easy when you're at the event because all you've got to do is run and eat and sleep, but the rest of the time you've got to run alongside everything else, and that was the hardest part of it. And not even just running, you know, prepping for everything, like constantly looking at maps and things. You do get a bit sick of it. But yeah, so that was pretty tough. But also, and I'm sure a lot of people will say this as well, is kind of self-doubt about whether I can actually do it and actually complete this race. Unfortunately for me, I've got my parents are both runners, and I've got quite a supportive family. So there's a lot of people around me telling me that you will be able to do it and it'll be fine, and reassuring me about that. But one tip I'll give people about the self-doubt thing is kind of the social media. Give it an arm's length, because you'll be reading through it and everyone else will seem so much more prepared and ready for this than you will be, and that fuels your self-doubt even more. It's very useful for certain things, but it can also not be very good for your head game. So yeah, surround yourself with lots of people that believe in you, that you think you can do it, and you'll succeed.
That sounds like pretty good advice for life in general as well. I think
Yeah.
we've got two life
Yes.
coaches on tonight. Okay, so what I'm going to ask about next is nutritional strategy, and I see there's a few questions building up in the Q&A. We will come back to those at the end, and we'll rattle through as many of those Q&A questions, so we're not ignoring them. But we're going to talk about nutritional strategy. Back to Filippo, you actually took a pretty novel approach to it. So would you like to talk about?
So rear events, well, certainly the expedition events are vegetarian only catering. And when I did the Dragons back in 2019, I was really worried about that, because I at the time I was very much a meat eater. I didn't restrict my diet in any way whatsoever. Being a runner, I always needed lots of calories, and I just ate anything in sight. And so I was very worried that I wouldn't get this idea that that there wasn't any protein in a vegetarian diet. And the reason for my DNF at the 2019 Dragons back was all down to nutrition. I got my nutrition horribly wrong, and it had nothing to do with the vegetarian diet. But it got me thinking. It got me thinking about the whole issue of animal versus plant protein. And so I did a lot of research, and I decided my stepson was vegan at the time. A 16-year-old, he'd turned vegan, and so there was certainly someone in the family who was vegan. And my partner was now cooking a meat dish for myself and a vegan dish for her son. So that had certain challenges in the kitchen. So I decided, you know what, I need to explore options, because I was devastated by my DNF at Dragon's Back, and I wanted to look at alternative options. And the issue was nutrition, and so I took the plunge. I went completely vegan after the 2019 Dragons Back, and I haven't looked back. It was a personal decision. I'm not suggesting that it works for anyone else, but for me, it certainly worked. Just to give you a bit of background, I'm a 54-year-old amateur endurance runner. I've been running for 30 years, and so I have a lot of fatigue and muscle damage from years of running ultras. And for me, going vegan allowed me to put the kind of training I needed for Dragon's Back, the proper kind of training, not just the distance, but in particular the vert. And on the long runs itself, it allowed me to run further, to run with less nausea. So I found the whole concept of moving to plant protein very helpful for myself, and I was no longer afraid of the culinary choices that were being offered at the Dragon's Back in 2022 when I came back, because I was now a full-on vegan, and I actually embraced it. And for me, I think one of the great successes of Ohly events is the food. It is just incredible. And in my tent, I was the only vegan vegetarian, and
we just lost Filippo at the crucial moment.
oh no!
Filippo, you just froze. Just rewind to you said in your tent you were the only.
I was the only vegetarian vegan in my tent, and so I was expecting a lot of complaints about the food, and everyone hauling extra food out of their bag to supplement the evening meals. But literally after the first night, after day one, everyone in my tent was absolutely raving about the food. The food, an army marches on its stomach, and the Dragon's Back and Cape Wrath marches to the tune of the kitchen. The kitchen is what keeps us going. They are incredible. The food is incredible. You cannot believe the quality and the volume and the beauty of this food made in the middle of a wilderness area. For me, it is the most astounding thing of this entire thing, of the entire event, and justifies the price tag of the event solely, without the experience of the mountains. I love the food. And that's not just me as a vegan saying it. My tent mates also voted for the kitchen staff. So that's a very specific thing. But I remember at our race briefing that you gave in Conway, you said two very simple things, and those things I have taken over years of running. It's taken me 30 years to get it right, but you've got to have variety, and you've got to keep it, simple, and it's got to be something that you've trained in. You literally have to train your gut as much as your legs and your lungs and your heart. And so I got to the event, and what I eat and what I drink is less important than the fundamentals of, you need to get a good balance of carbohydrates, salt, and water. How you get it in, what your preferred method is, that's up to you. You've got to figure that out yourself. My branded products are not necessarily any better than the branded products you use or the things that I cook in my kitchen. But it's got to work for you, and there's got to be variety. And so I also follow the notion of a mixture of slow and fast release carbs. That's an important thing. But the thing that I think most people get wrong is salt. You've got to get your salt levels up. And a lot of the nausea that we feel on endurance events, I've been doing them for 30 years. A lot of it comes from an imbalance between your salt and water. So either you're drinking too much and not taking enough salt, or you're drinking too little and you've got too much salt. But once your salt concentrations get out of kilter, whether it's too low or too high, that is what feeds a lot of the nausea. I'm not saying it's the only thing, but it is one of the things. And I've always suffered from nausea, and I don't always get it right. But on this year's Dragon's Back, I got it right for 6 consecutive days. And I literally put it down to getting the balance between salt and water correct.
I think that's some really useful insights. Thank you, Filippo. Pip, how about your experience? What were your nutritional strategies?
Definitely with Filippo saying the food's amazing. Lasagna night was the best night. So I didn't really have like a strategy or a plan or anything. Someone had said on the expedition race training weekend, bring a wide variety of food. In fact, I think everyone had said that. And I already knew that anyway, but you know, I've kind of made it my mission to try as many things as I could, and mostly for me, it's just.
And we just lost Pip.
Gels and
Pip, can you just rewind 10 seconds? You just froze.
Oh, right, okay. I don't know where I was. Anyway,
things you learnt on the expedition weekend.
Okay. Yeah, so everyone was saying bring a wide variety of food. So that's what I did. I made it my mission. I tried as many different things as I could when I was running, all sorts of stuff. Mostly things I could buy in a supermarket. So I took a few gels and things that I tried before, obviously. But I had a huge variety of stuff when I was on the event, because I knew that come day 8, and if you had too much of the same thing, you're just sick of it and you don't want to eat anything. Eating became quite difficult for me towards the end. And I think it was mostly because nearly every day I was coming in quite late. So usually around 9:30 or something like that. So getting changed and then going straight to the food tent and having to eat a full meal was quite hard, because usually, you know, you've ran a long way and it's hard to just stuff it straight in, and you want to go to bed really. And I think in hindsight that I could have sacrificed a little bit more time sleeping, because you're not really sleeping, for just making sure I got a bit more food in, because yeah, come day 7, it was hard work. I was still eating during the day, it's still eating plenty. Learned from nutrition.
Pip, you just cut out at the end there, but what I might just add in, again, from speaking to many participants over many years, I've definitely seen a trend. We often talk about good admin, personal admin skills, of what get most participants through the event. And one of those is the discipline to sit in the catering tent and eat another meal, or eat slowly and digest your food, eat as much as you can, and to sacrifice not getting into bed for another half an hour or so, because you can deal with a bit of sleep deprivation and you're going to be deprived anyway. So another half an hour here or there doesn't make any difference. What you can't afford to do is not eat a proper meal, because you need those calories. So for particularly maybe the last 10% of the field, making sure you force yourself to have time to eat every day is really important. We're going to move on. So back to Filippo.
Can I just add one last point on
course.
nutrition? I don't think it's a coincidence that the catering tent has 2 meals on offer. They have a soup meal, which I think they start serving from 4 p.m. and then they've got the main meal which starts serving at 6 p.m. Now, no matter how good your nutrition and hydration strategy is, you will invariably get to camp a little bit dehydrated. And for me, I always started with the soup. Even if I got to camp after 6 p.m. and both were on offer, I always started with the soup meal. I had a cup of soup and a cup of tea, because it was both nutritious, but it was also getting my hydration levels back up again immediately. Then I would relax a bit and then go on to a more substantial, solid meal. And I don't think that's not a coincidence that the tent offers those 2 options, and take those 2 options in the order that they're served. And I think there's a good logical reason for it.
Yeah, maybe I'll add in at this point that we have developed the menu over many years for the events. We've taken expert advice from nutritionists, dietitians who really understand how to get the right mix of ingredients so that there's the right mix of micronutrients, including the right amount of protein in a plant-based diet. So it is something we've thought about a lot. And I think generally we get it right. Obviously with catering, you will always you'll never keep everybody happy, but we do our best. But let's move on. We've spoken a lot about food. So Pip, perhaps you could tell us your number 1 highlight from Cape Wrath this year. What springs to mind?
The weather.
Highlights, excellent.
I would also like to say the shower on day 7. I think it was the best shower of my life. It's absolutely incredible. I think my main highlight of the whole event, you know, after you've thought about the route and where you are, and that's pretty incredible, and what you've managed to achieve, it's the people, and the people absolutely make that event. From volunteers and marshals, and you get to know people. So by day 8, you know, you're going past people and they're giving you hugs and absolutely rooting for you. You know every runner in the field, and they're all rooting for you to finish as well. I had the most incredible tent mates. A bunch of ladies, they were like cleaning the tent before I arrived every night, and they even got to the point where they were setting up my bed for me. And then the people at home, you know, the ultra mail is absolutely like the best thing. And it definitely just pushes you on, and you get to the point where you just don't want to disappoint those people that have been sending you so many lovely messages. And yeah, the people is absolutely my highlight of the whole event.
Yeah, I think the ultra mail is what we call it on Cape Wrath, and Dragon Mail on Dragon's Back. I think Dragon's Back this year we had 11,000 messages to the participants during the 6 days, and how it brightens people's day when they come into that tent and they're absolutely shattered, and then the printer kicks out these long kind of messages to them. It's absolutely fantastic. So Filippo, maybe share a highlight from this year's Dragon's Back with us.
So for me, I have 2 big highlights. So I'm going to talk about the event, the actual running part of the event. Grib Goch is just the most magic piece of mountain rock to run across. Climbing up it is exhilarating. There's an element of fear and anxiety because it's a scramble. It's a reasonable grade scramble, but nothing that anyone without a massive fear of heights cannot handle. But it's just the most incredible piece of rock in North Wales. And for me, I loved going across Grib Goch. It just filled me with, you know, if you love mountains, Grib Goch will fill your soul. So that's on the event side. But I have to agree with Pip. For me, it's the people, and the people come to the fore because of the format of the event. When you do a single stage event, it becomes very insular. You're focused on getting to the finish. You just want to get to the finish. And as you progress, especially on these longer 100-milers and 200-milers, you almost become isolated in your own world. You've got your own seconding crew helping you. On Dragon's Back, the support crew is the main crew. You don't have a personal support crew. So your support crew are your tent mates, are the event crew. They become your family. And because you have this rest period from when you finish until when you start the next morning, you have the opportunity to engage with them, to share your miseries with them. They become your confessor, your psychologist, your priest, your mother, your best friend. And Ian Stewart, who I believe is on this call, I met him on the 2018 Cape Wrath. We raced together, and we are now good mates, only because of this of these events. And there are many others that I've come to develop real lasting relationships and friendships, because it really is like a band of brothers. You're suffering together, and there's a macabre joy in that common suffering. And what keeps you going is you realize everyone else is suffering just as badly as you. So just dry the tears away from your eyes, get up. Their blisters are just as bad, probably worse. their nausea is way worse, but yet they're still going. So you draw inspiration from these incredible heroic people around you, whether they're the crew members who are working who are working as hard as you are in a different aspect as you are. So for me, it's this. Exist. You've got these 100 support staff, you've got these 200 runners, and you're in it together. And it is the most, it is a unique experience that you will not find in any other format.
Wow. Thanks, Filippo. That's quite an inspiring answer. Pip, perhaps I can ask you, what was there must have been a challenge at the event, the moment, the reality of how hard the race is, Cape Wrath. What was the moment for you when if it was tough?
Day 5. And so this is after having done day 3, which for me was one of the toughest days, because I was constantly chasing the cut-offs all day long. And I think I was 20 minutes ahead at every single checkpoint and the finish. Hard all day long. And then getting to day 4, and I think that was the worst weather that we had on the race. It was something else. It was an experience, let's say that. And that's the shortest day, so everyone goes with the mindset of, okay, we can relax today, but it definitely wasn't. And because I put so much into day 3, day 4 was really hard. And then by day 5, I was feeling the pain of the race, and I think it's pretty normal for everybody to be hurting in some way. But for me, I'd never really experienced that on a race before. So that was hard to deal with, because you don't know how much pain is like too much pain. So I was really feeling it on day 5, and I spent all day thinking, this is it. This is my race over. This is going to be my last day. I'm going to drop out at the end of today, and I'm not going to be able to continue tomorrow, because I don't think I've got another 100 miles in me. And that was my downfall. The rest of the time I'd ran the race checkpoint to checkpoint, and not have thought about the rest of the distance. But on day 5, I'd thought of the distance, and that's when I thought I couldn't do it. And I got back to camp, and I rang my mum, and she made me cry. And she was like, is your leg still attached? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, right, well, go and have some food, go and chat to some people, and you'll be fine. And then I went into the food tent feeling a bit better, printed off my ultra mail, and there was a message from Ian Stewart saying, well done on having I can't remember how he put it, essentially being the slowest on the course this year. And he was like, you can do it, you've nearly finished it now, and just keep going. And that was enough, that message and the phone call. And I was like, yeah, I've got this now. And so I really was in a pit at the end of day 5, but having those things in your armory, kind of knowing how to pick yourself up. And I'd heard someone say before, I volunteered on the Spine before, and I remember someone saying, don't quit until you've eaten something and had a sleep, and then decide. And that was gold as well.
That's great. That was really, really amazing insights. Filippo, how about if we just jump all the way back to Dragon's Back in 2019, because you've kind of hinted at that DNF being quite a painful process. Are you happy to maybe share a little bit more detail about that? Maybe not.
It was personally very painful. I don't think I've ever DNF'd, and I hadn't DNF'd up in 27 years of running up until that point. I'd had some particularly awful runs, but I'd always managed to struggle through to the finish. But I'd reached a point where I literally couldn't go on, and I think that's testament to the toughness of the Dragon's Back. That it's an unforgiving event. It's not an event that you can make multiple mistakes and get away with it. And I certainly made a couple of fundamental errors, and it caught me out. And I remember on day 3, just walking through the forest, coming down into the town where they have the checkpoint, and I knew this was it. I'd been having a mental battle for the entire day. So it was an 8 hours of a mental battle. Can I do this? Can I do it? Where can I find the energy? Where can I find the strength? And I couldn't. And when I got in, I just sat down, and I was embarrassed. I was sad. It was just a cocktail of emotions. And I got back into camp, and although we were encouraged to stay with the event and keep going to the finish, I just wanted to get as far away from the event as possible. I got into a taxi and went off to the nearest town, found a hotel, and had a lovely shower, a great meal, slept, and woke up the next morning feeling fine, and almost feeling that why did I, and so that started a 2-year process of redemption. Literally, it was, I had to redeem myself for that failure. It was driven by, and this is advice that I would like to give to anyone who wants to do Dragon's Back. Dragon's Back is a race that has a very high dropout rate. More than half of the runners will not complete the full event, will drop out at some point in time. That's a guarantee. The question is, how much more than half will it be? And there are various factors such as whether that will impact that. And invariably, people who go out too hard on days 1 and 2 are more likely to fall victim to that statistic. And that's exactly what happened to me in 2019. And when I compare my day 1 time in 2019 to 2022, I was an hour slower in 2022. And yet I was fitter, stronger, better prepared in all respects, because I'd had the learning from 2019. And yet still I ran an hour slower. But I had to control myself to run an hour slower, because I was fitter and stronger, knew the route. There was a real risk that I would have run that same time as 2019 or even quicker, but I didn't. I ran slower. And when I looked at the statistics, because you get your positions at all the different checkpoints on day 1, my lowest position, I think I was at about position 80 or 90. I ended up.
Filippo, you just cut out then, and I think you were going to say the critical bit, which was you actually finished 22nd overall. So
correct. Yes,
yeah.
I finished 22nd overall. But the point I was saying is that at some point on day 1, about halfway through day 1, I was sitting in about position 90. So I caught up about 70 positions over the next 6 days. And that was primarily because I was incredibly cautious on day 1. I was lucky. I had the fear. I had that fear of my failure of 2019. Many first-time runners don't have that. And so my advice to you is be cautious. This Dragon's Back is an incredibly tough event. Cape Wrath, I've done it as well, is equally an incredibly tough event. You take those early days slowly, and unless you're in the top 10, and you can withstand that kind of punishment. Those are professional athletes. They train. They have genetic abilities far beyond us middle and back of the packers. You have to be cautious at the field, and that was my learning from 2019. It was a bitter pill to swallow, and unfortunately, it took me 3 years in order to overcome it. And I literally was emotional at the finish line when I got to Cardiff. I think Shane I was whispering in Shane's ear about what this meant to me.
I do remember that moment, actually, and it's quite special as a race organizer when you see how much people have invested in their race, and how much it means to them. It's yeah, it's pretty emotional for everybody, actually. I'm going to jump ahead in some of the questions that I planned. I'm going to ask Pip next about your maybe top advice that you would offer to somebody who was thinking of entering Cape Wrath next year.
Top advice. Don't underestimate your prep. You're gonna need to get out on as much of the terrain and as you possibly can, and using your kit and things like that. Things like so I saw a lot of people with snapped poles on day 2 of Cape Wrath. There's a section where you've gone up and over, and then it's basically a downhill bog for about for a couple of miles, and you're sinking straight into it. And a lot of people digging your poles in, and then they just snap straight away. So even just simple things like that, knowing your kit and knowing what it's capable of, they're a couple of big things I've written and underlined on my notes. The bogs are unlike anything. So your imagination of what a bog is like. I mean, we had it bad this year with the amount of water that was about. The bogs were absolutely thriving. So don't underestimate them, because when people say it's boggy, they really, really mean it. And that's going to take its toll on you. It's a lot of people, we were calling it bog ankle by the end. Everyone had big swollen ankles from hoying your feet out of bogs all the time. So that's the thing. I've also written down confidence in river crossings. So some of the rivers that we crossed this year were pretty epic, and we were having to hike up a bit further to find spots to cross the river. A lot of people tended to team up. You know, you collected the people that were around you when you knew you were coming to a river crossing, so you could all cross together, which is what you're supposed to do. But just having a little bit of confidence or a little bit of knowledge, even before you get to the race. They've got good articles on the website, obviously, but if you think you need more than that, you definitely easily find someone who can talk you through those sorts of things. And it's good to just know what you're in for that sort of thing. Other than that, everything counts. So hiking out in the hills counts. Days spent even in a tent, getting to know your sleeping system, and just all those itty bitty nitty gritty things, everything you can think of. Just try it out before you get there, and then you'll be more prepared than you think.
Brilliant. Thank you. Ellen has just shared a link to our river crossing guidance article in the chat. That is required reading for, well, I'd say anybody taking part in Cape Wrath, but to be quite honest, anybody traveling in the backcountry, it's really good reading, really useful stuff. Filippo, so same question for you, the advice that you would offer to someone who was thinking about taking part this year.
So the most important thing is camp admin. If you want to finish a multi-day event such as Cape Wrath or Dragon's Back, you've got to get your camp admin sorted. And it's difficult to practice camp admin unless you've been at an event. So what my coach made me do in South Africa, she took me on a 3-day, 2-night fast packing hike in the mountains here in South Africa, the Drakensberg Mountains, if anyone's hiked in South Africa, to get me some mountain experience, because we were going into the mountains of North Wales, but primarily to get the camp admin. So I had to carry not just my compulsory gear that I was racing, but I was carrying all my camping gear, and we had to we would arrive in camp deliberately. My coach made us hike fairly long distances, that we arrived in camp in the dark. So now we had to deal with the darkness and head torches and getting all our kit out, getting to bed, getting fed, getting up in the morning, and that worked. That helped me a lot, because not only because I learned quickly what was important, such as what Shane recommended early: have a soft pillow. Don't try and sleep on your shoes, because they're smelly and they're very uncomfortable. So have something that is comfortable to rest your head on. The sleeping bag, is it going to keep you warm? Is it warm enough? Does it work? How does the zips work? Many of us are not necessarily very experienced campers, but Dragon's Back is essentially like glamorous camping. So go and do some camping, and do some long days in between, because you're not only fulfilling some training requirements, but you're getting used to the kit and the admin that is required, and the gear that works. Here's another tip. I soon realized that when you get into camp, you need to air your feet out, because especially if you've been in wet conditions all day, you start to get trench foot. So you need to dry your feet out so that the skin can dry out. But the problem is the camps at Cape Wrath and Dragon's Back are normally in a farmer's field with long grass. The grass is full of dew and moisture from the rain during the day, so you can't keep your feet dry. So because I'd experienced the same problem on my preparation hike, I bought a pair of waterproof socks, which I didn't wear during the race, because I don't advise anyone wearing waterproof socks while they're running. But in camp, I wore my waterproof socks with some open-toed shoes, and that's what I walked around camp at night, and they were fine. And then when I sat in the tent and ate my dinner, I would take my socks off and allowed my feet to air and allow the skin to dry out nicely. So and a lot of these things either came from reading blogs, or from attending webinars like you're doing now, or from first-hand experience of being in a mountain situation, in a camping environment where you don't have the comforts of your bedroom and your kitchen and your bathroom.
That's fantastic advice. I'm going to ask Pip and Filippo one more question, and we're going to do like a quick fire question here, and then we're going to jump into some of the Q&A stuff. So Filippo, we'll stay with you. If there was one thing, if someone was unsure of entering and they're kind of umming and ahhing over Dragon's Back or Cape Wrath, what would be the one thing that you would say to them?
I have been running for 30 years. There is no distance I haven't run. There's hardly a country I haven't run in. The high water mark of my 30-year running career are the two expedition races, Dragon's Back and Cape Wrath. They are unique, they are special, they are incredible. If you are in any doubt whether this experience will change your life, I can tell you it will. I would sign up for these events, do them. Do not be afraid of failure. There is a very high failure rate in both of these events. Do not be afraid of failure. Do the research. There are many ways to reduce your chances of failure, as we've been speaking tonight. The fact that you're attending these webinars shows A, an interest, and B, a desire to try and get things right. I can honestly say that there are very few events in my 30 years of running that I could recommend more highly than the Cape Wrath and Dragon's Back. From wilderness, from true mountain experience, seeing where can you see the whole of the Scottish Highlands in 1 week? the entire length of the Scottish Highlands. Yeah, it was incredible. They really were events that will live in my mind and my psyche for the rest of my life.
That is a wonderful endorsement. Thank you very much. Pip, the pressure is on now.
I would say you have no idea what you're capable of. So if it's a question of can I do it or can't I do it? You have no idea until you actually try it. And even if you fail or you feel like you failed the first time round, come back to it, because you grow as a person and you have no idea. Also, I've heard people say, why would you pay for a race like that? Why can't you just do it solo? Firstly, the logistics is incredible to even do something like Cape Wrath. There's nowhere to stay, and you just don't get the same experience. I think we've already covered all of that. The people that make the race, the care that you get from the race, and just this journey you go on with all these people is fantastic.
I think you're 100% right about that. Thank you. And I know from having done the Cape Wrath route by foot on my own, kind of self-powered, it's a radically different experience to what you get as a participant at one of the events. Filippo and Pip, thank you so much for your time. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to run through some of the questions that we've got. So Eleanor's going to help me. So Eleanor, why don't you just come and sit here so everyone move the camera. So Eleanor has been answering stuff on the Q&A and helping me. So Eleanor in the business, Eleanor writes pretty much all of our blogs, website posts, composes all of the emails to the participants. So she's a bit of a wordsmith.
Yeah, so you'll hear from me a lot in the course of the event. So what shoes did you wear for different days? Because the terrain is very mixed.
So I'm going to answer these questions, but mostly, unless there's something very specific. So just because I know we're running short on time now. So the thing that I have seen from many participants over the years is this obsession on footwear. And it is very important to get the right footwear, but the answer for person A will nearly always be different for person B. And it comes back to what Pip and Filippo have been saying all evening. It's about the preparation. You need to know through all of those training runs you've been doing in the months and months prior to the event, what is going to be right for you. I think a very good generalization would be, as a minimum, you want trail running shoes, which have got some decent studs. And some runners even go for fell running shoes that are even more aggressive with their studs on the bottom.
So how many hours on average weekly would you commit to training, or what was your typical weekly running distance in preparation?
So I think I will ask Pip and Filippo to answer that. So just like very quick fire, kind of roughly what was your weekly mileage in hours for your training? So Filippo first.
I can't remember the hours, but for me, the most important was vert. Distance was less important. So I tried at peak to run, obviously I'm metric, so it's in meters, but I tried to run at least to climb at least 5,000 meters every week. I think my peak week, I got up to about 8,000 meters. And it was less about the distance as it was the time on my feet and getting the vertical in, because the terrain certainly on Dragon's Back is a lot less runnable than, say, Cape Wrath. So you will be doing a lot of hiking. It's why a lot of the participants take poles. There's a lot of steep terrain. So vertical is important. And people often forget vertical is both the down as well as the up. The down run on the downs on Dragon's Back are horrendous on the legs. They are steep, they're technical, they are nasty. So when I did vert, I focused as much on the down as I did on the up.
Brilliant. Thank you, Filippo. Pip, same question to you about kind of your typical training week.
I'll keep it short. Hours, I'm not quite sure, bearing in mind I'm a bit of a slower runner, so if I run a lot of miles in a week, it's a lot of hours in a week. I think my top weeks were sitting at 60-65 miles, and I did that maybe 3 or 4 times, and I'd try and do a big week, drop down to a smaller week and build it up to there. So in kind of 4-week blocks sort of things.
Sounds pretty sensible. So Eleanor, what's our next question?
What would you say is the most common overlooked area of training for first-time participants?
I think I will ask Filippo and Pip again. So Pip, to you first, kind of most overlooked bit of training.
For me, from my experience, terrain. Yeah, just the sheer amount of bogs and wetness underfoot, and pathless trail and river crossings and things like that.
Okay. I guess I'll come to you in a sec, Filippo. What I would say is as a percentage of the course, actually the bogs are not quite as bad as as Pip is maybe making out.
Yeah,
I think it was a very wet edition this year, so maybe those bogs just have ingrained themselves a bit more in your mind. Filippo, you've already mentioned the avert height gain. So would you say that was the overlooked?
I would say one slightly different. The one overlooked thing is your ankles. So the technical terrain on Dragon's Back puts a lot of demand on your ankles. So unless you are training on very uneven terrain, you're not training your ankles. And there are lots of twisted ankles, and sore shins, because people haven't done the necessary conditioning of their ankles and their shins for the type of terrain. And unfortunately on Dragon's Back, it's the first 2.5 days that punish you. So by the end of 2.5 days, there are runners whose ankles and shins are so broken that when you get to the more forgiving terrain of the second half of the week, they're just unable to run it because their ankles and their feet are destroyed by that stage.
Yeah, I mean, nothing beats the experience of running in terrain to build up the strength and proprioception. So Eleanor, what's our next question?
How much did your carried kit for the day weigh? And what would you say is an optimum?
Okay, so why don't you go for a rough estimate, Filippo first, then Pip, on how much you think your bag weighed on your hill bag?
So the heaviest is your water. Dragon's Back is a ridgeline race. The mere fact that you're on a ridge means there's not going to be any water up there. Even if it's raining, there's not going to be clean water that you can drink. So I carried 2 liters of water. So that was my heaviest component. That's 2 kilograms. Then if I add the rest, I'm guessing I've probably got another 2 kilograms, maybe 2.5. So I'm looking at anywhere between 4 and 5 kilograms fully loaded. And obviously, as I drink my liquid before the next refill point, I will drop down to maybe 2 or 3 kilograms. But don't underestimate when you're on a ridge line, you're not going to find water, and there are long dry spells on Dragon's Back. And I think many people try to get away with just 2 bottles, maybe a liter and a half, and they suffered as a result.
Yeah. Pip, how about yourself?
I couldn't even guess to you how much mine weighed. A lot of it was food because I was out for a long time, and then a lot of layers and a lot of spare layers. With Cape Wrath, you do not have the water problem. I think only on the first half of day 6 where you might struggle to find water, but the rest of the time, a lot of people were just carrying a 500 ml water flask, and that was it. So you don't have that extra added weight you can drink from a lot of places on Cape Wrath.
Yeah, the 2 different races certainly have different challenges to them. So a question that follows neatly is about the availability of water and essentially whether it's safe to drink on the course, which is I will answer that. So we will always say that the onus and responsibility, if you're going to drink on the course, sits with the participant. At Cape Wrath, we don't provide any water points. For the Dragon's Back, you can pick up water at the support point, and then we have a second water point during the day. So it is possible to go from those 2 locations each day and refill your water. Most participants do actually end up topping up water on the course. Generally speaking, and particularly in the Scottish Highlands, the water is safe to drink if it comes directly out of a mountain stream or river. The higher up the mountain you are, the safer it becomes. What I would say is an absolute no-no is drinking water that has come downstream of animals, agricultural land, or any kind of dwelling. I've been drinking water out of streams in my entire kind of running career, and I've had 3 episodes of illness linked to water in, I don't know, 30 years of being in the mountains. And I will drink some pretty ropey looking water. I'm not that fussed. And on one of those occasions, it was absolutely directly linked to some farm animals that I hadn't seen. I drank from this stream, thought it was fine. I went another 100 meters up the hill, found a herd of cows kind of stood by the stream. So obviously got some horrible, animal feces in the water. So we'll go for the next question.
And so how do you manage the transition to wet weather running in terms of shoes and socks and managing your feet? So Filippo, you've already kind of touched on that a bit, but was there anything in particular you thought about in advance?
I carried 6 pairs of socks with me every day. The greatest thing is taking your shoes off and putting a pair of dry socks on. It just absorbs the moisture away from your skin, and for 5 minutes, you feel like you're invincible. They will get wet again, but my advice, socks are tiny, they are light, they're not going to take up space in your pack. My advice for wet weather is so whenever I got to a support point or a water point, I would change my socks. Even if we hadn't had a particularly wet or boggy day, it was just the feeling of having a fresh pair of socks on. It takes no time at all. And what it allowed me to do is it allowed me to remove any grit or any stones that had crept into my shoe. So it was kind of a full maintenance, like a Formula One change of tires. Let's put it like that. And I would highly recommend that. And it helped me deal with the wet conditions on Dragon's Back this year.
Brilliant. Pip, how about yourself? Did you have a particular strategy?
I took fresh socks for every day. Obviously, I did take a couple of spare pairs to put in my bag. Didn't change them quite as often. I did tape my feet every day as well. In specific places where I know might rub on me, mostly because your feet are wet all day, every day. And yeah, the grit getting into your socks, it will just wear away over that many days, and you will get quite sore from that. But again, just comes back to training. Just spend, I know it's a bit grim, spend as much time as you can with wet feet and find what works for you, find socks that work for you. That is probably my biggest takeaway from that. Try different socks and find ones that work for your feet and the shoes that you're wearing. And then even if you've got wet feet, you'll be able to deal with that slightly easier.
I think that sounds like good advice. So Eleanor has just posted into the chat a link to our foot care guidance article, which has got some really useful advice. It is tried and tested, so have a read of that. We have had a question about what's the typical age and the oldest kind of participant. So I know off the top of my head that the average age of a Dragon's Back and Cape Wrath participant is 46 this year. I said I knew it, and now I suddenly feel doubtful, but it's 45 or 46. And the oldest finisher at Dragon's Back this year was Lenny, who was 66. And wow. I know, yeah, it's really impressive. I know there was actually our original event doctor, Mike Mitchell. He started the Dragon's Back, and I think Mike is 68 or 69, although he wasn't successful. It just shows that he had got himself to a level of training and preparedness where it was feasible to start, and he had a really, really good go at it. So I think at this point, I'm going to wrap up. We've done about 90 minutes of chit chat. I'm incredibly grateful for the very kind words from Filippo and Pip tonight. Thank you for your time. I hope that the information has been useful to everybody. What I would say, if you're thinking about entering and you have a question for us, pick up the phone, send us an email. We're very happy to chat with you. It is a big challenge, but it's not impossible. And we'd really love to see you at an event, hopefully next year. Thank you to Eleanor, who has given up her Tuesday night and not watched the football to help me out tonight. I'm almost going to say I wonder what the result will be, but I'm actually not bothered at all. So thank you, everybody. I will wrap it up there. Happy running, and I hope you have lots of luck with your training. Thanks very much. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.